but I can do this already in jQuery. For many people in this room, it's probably a crazy statement to say. And what's weird for me is it's something that I actually thought of when I was learning Vue.js. Modern JavaScript frameworks can be completely overwhelming for people whose JavaScript world is heavily orientated around libraries like jQuery. And in the talk today, I want to go through what helped me make the mental transition from jQuery to Vue.js, and I want to show how the barriers to entry for the world of modern JavaScript can be substantially lowered. Before I get started, I just want to talk briefly about who I am. My name is Talvinder Bansal. I'm an obsessive learner. I love working in web development. I spend a lot of my free time doing it. I've spent the last 11 years of my career working in the insurance industry, working on bespoke products for motor insurance in the UK. My day-to-day work heavily revolves around Laravel and VueJS, which is Laravel being a PHP framework. Outside of coding, I love and I'm heavily passionate about photography. Luckily for me, I get to travel the world doing wedding photography, and I just generally enjoy traveling as well. I've been to over 25 different countries and aspire to see the world at some point. These are my social media links. I'm going to do go through a code example shortly. It will be, the code's all up on GitHub, and if you've got any questions, you can either talk to me after the talk or get at me on Twitter afterwards. So I want to quickly talk about my journey with JavaScript. My journey begins with a compact framework called MooTools. It was what I learned when I was learning JavaScript. I had the choice to learn either jQuery or MooTools, and I felt like for me, when I was going through the documentation, that MooTools felt like it was more of a programmer's version of JavaScript, and jQuery at the time felt like it was something that designers use because it felt very procedural, and it just wasn't for me. Like I didn't like it. Does anyone ever remember MooTools? Anyone ever use MooTools? Yes, thank you very much. You know what I'm talking about, right? Yep. Yeah. Okay, perfect. Okay, and at the time at the company I was working at, we were using MooTools in conjunction with a micro framework, a CSS micro framework called Pure.js, which was made by Yahoo. At the time, it wasn't responsive, which is why I've crossed responsive out of there, because lies. And that was OK for the company. They didn't need responsive websites. It was fine. And then business needs changed, and we needed to build responsive applications. So we hopped over to everyone's favorite CSS framework, Bootstrap. And with Bootstrap comes jQuery, of course. So that's how I ended up learning jQuery, and I hated every minute of it. But you know, just one of those things. And it's one of those things that everyone knows. Whether you use it on a day-to-day basis, I feel like everyone knows jQuery at some point, which is why the talk is not, you know, MooTools to Vue. Like, it's jQuery to Vue. OK, so around the same time, the business moved from a PHP framework called Zen Framework 1 over to Laravel, which is what we still use today. And Laravel at the time, well, and it still is, a very opinionated PHP framework, but made no opinion on its front-end technology stack. Over time, so that was pretty much our technology stack at the time, which was Laravel, Bootstrap, and jQuery. Over time, Laravel integrated Bootstrap as its preferred or out-of-the-box CSS framework, and around mid-2015, it brought in Vue.js as its preferred front-end framework, and that's really what sort of ushered me towards Vue.js. So that is my rough journey from vanilla JavaScript all the way around to Vue.js. And we're going to move on to what JavaScript looks like today. So if you've ever talked to anyone who works with JavaScript on a full-time basis, your conversation will probably involve some, if not all, of the following words. And to be completely frank, it's overwhelming. I feel like I know what I'm doing with JavaScript, and I've spoken to some people that work with JavaScript full-time, and I feel like I don't know what's going on. So I can only imagine what it looks like to people coming from the world of jQuery over to modern JavaScript. And I feel like this tooling, or like all this modern JavaScript jargon, provides a really high barrier to entry for people trying to get into this new world, like, basically, just, like, JavaScript, chill out, man. Like, this is too crazy. So what I want to get back to the point of doing is, like, I want to, like, why can't I just learn Vue.js if that's what I'm interested in? Why do I need to learn Webpack, Babel? I need to understand what modules are. I need, and all this crazy technology that goes around it. Like, can't I just learn Vue.js? Is that not a thing anymore? And that's what the talk is really about. So I want to talk about lowering barriers to entry and making JavaScript accessible to everyone, no matter where they've come from. So the first thing I feel that you can do is, just remove all that tooling. If you don't need to know what Webpack is, you don't need to know what Browserify is, or actually, is Browserify better than Webpack? Like, is that even a conversation I want to have? Do I need to use NPM or Yarn? Or actually, are they the same thing, really? Like, does it matter? Not really. So if we remove the tooling, we inherently remove the jargon that goes along with the world of JavaScript, right? And we can focus on getting back to basics. And getting back to basics really looks like just including a bit, like a couple of script tags in your page and starting to work from there. Like, if I want to learn this technology, let me learn the technology, not a million things before I even get there. And so that's what I'm talking about when, that's what I mean by targeted education. If I'm interested in Vue.js, let me learn Vue.js. In my understanding, Vue.js is very unique in that it doesn't require you to use any tooling. I can't say for certainty that this is true of other JavaScript frameworks, but when I tried to learn React and Angular, I felt like there was so much to get going, I couldn't just do the script tag thing and let's roll with it from there. It's actually what drew me into the framework more, like along with being ushered in by Laravel, it was what really drew me into Vue.js and what continued my education through that framework. And what actually happened for me and what I feel like a lot of people could benefit from is having this low barrier to entry, and then as they bought into the technology stack, then going to learn the tooling and embracing the whole modern way of JavaScript as your needs grow with that framework. So let's quickly talk about the education part of this. If you've worked with jQuery, sorry, I'm just going to run through some of the differences between jQuery and Vue.js. So jQuery itself is a library, and a library is a collection of functions and utilities, whereas Vue.js is a framework which provides you with a collection of structured patterns and libraries that are used to help structure and build a whole application out for you. So they actually serve completely different purposes. Vue is not a jQuery replacement, but it can, and in fact, jQuery can be used alongside Vue. The next thing that we're going to look at is that jQuery is primarily concerned with DOM manipulation, whereas Vue.js is primarily concerned with data manipulation. And what that means, like if you've used jQuery and you don't know what DOM manipulation is, it's what you're doing the entire time. It's grabbing elements from the DOM and manipulating their values, their attributes, and their properties to manage the state of your application. Whereas with a data manipulation, something that's concerned with data manipulation, the application state is held within JavaScript objects, and changes to the DOM will automatically occur as the as the data changes. And in fact, actually, as you start to use a data manipulation framework, you'll find that jQuery, like libraries like jQuery, where you're manipulating the DOM and having to make sure things are all in sync constantly, start to feel really clunky. So don't worry too much if this feels a bit wordy, because what I'm about to do now is dig into a code example, and we'll be able to see, hopefully, some of the differences between the two. OK, so like I said, I work in the insurance industry, and the scenario that helped me make the transition was, in our industry, we build what are called aggregators. And aggregators are where we talk to a number of different insurance companies, pull all the results back, send your data off to them, pull all the results back, and then give you a list of insurance quotes for you to ultimately pick from and pick whatever suits your needs. So I've really dumbed the example down just to hopefully illustrate how this works. What I wanted to do was live code, take this jQuery example that I've built up and live code all the way through to the Vue example. I'm not going to have time to do that. So I have an emergency link at the bottom, which was supposed to be if everything didn't go to plan. So we're just really going to look at the jQuery example and then look at the emergency example. So like I said, super ugly, super basic, but it's here to illustrate a point. So let me bring the thing up. Cool. OK, so I'm just going to hit the fetch quotes button. We've got this table here. It's going to go away, and it's going to render a list of insurance quotes. What we were doing at the time, obviously we were sorting them, but for the purpose of this example, I'm not sorting the quotes. Obviously, you'd expect the cheapest quote to be at the top, and that's really it. We find scenarios in this table where if you have a reason for sorry, let me back up a sec. You'll find that there are some quotes that are valid that you can select. There are some that are invalid and have reasons that they're invalid. Obviously, I've generated dummy data, and that's what's happening with this. That's why it doesn't make any actual sense. But this is vaguely representative of what our insurance aggregators do, just very ugly and stripped back down. So let me dig into the code of what this looks like so you guys can see. We have I've literally picked up and copied and pasted from the Bootstrap website the default template that Bootstrap gives you, and we have this button with an ID of fetch quotes, a table with an ID of table quotes, a caption with an ID of customer ID, and this pretty standard table head at the top here. And we have this empty table body. Below that, we have these script tags, which include jQuery and Bootstrap JS files. And when we get to the bit we're interested in, which is our JavaScript, we can find we have this massive function here called fetch quotes. And it has some HTML and stuff inside. And finally, we have this DOM ready thing, which is when a document's ready, grab this element with the ID of fetch quotes. When we click it, call this function called fetch quotes. Lots of fetching quotes going on. And in here, we have this fake timeout to simulate a load for a second, and a jQuery AJAX request, which when it's returned, pulls back this data, which we're then going to turn into HTML, like some HTML strings, collect them in an array called items, and then push them onto that table. And this is what we're talking about when we're saying we're manipulating the DOM. We're grabbing this element up here, for example, table quotes, digging into its body, emptying that element out, and then writing raw HTML and going through the process of reassembling the DOM, I guess. Not only is this expensive, but the thing that's pretty ugly about this is that we've got this table body, and we really don't know what's happening inside, right? Like, you couldn't just come across the code and be content with it, what was supposed to be there. You wouldn't really know. So that sort of covers the jQuery example, and what I'm going to do is just jump over to the emergency example, which is the finalized Vue thing, and jump straight down into the JavaScript code. Well, actually, let's start at the start. The first thing we said was we want to include script tags and start from there. So we have our Vue.js script tag. You can pull this in from the CDN. I've just copied it locally to the machine just to make sure there were no network issues for the purpose of the example. The next thing we want to look at is that Vue.js can only operate within a certain area of your DOM. So jQuery can actually access the entirety of your DOM, but Vue.js only operates within a targeted element. So in this instance, we're looking, using this CSS selector of ID app, we can see that Vue.js is only ever going to be able to operate within this element and wherever the closed div tag is here. Let me scroll back. Then we were talking about Vue.js being a framework that's concerned with data manipulation. We can actually see we've got 4 different properties here. Customer ID loading, which is a bool, an empty array of quotes, and a value called show all, which is a bool as well. Now, one of the things that my MD asked for was, as our panel got bigger, there was too many quotes on the page, right? And what they wanted to do was have the ability to hide all the quotes which were 0 values, hide all the quotes that were 0 values, but make them optionally visible. So if there was a reason that you'd been declined insurance, someone didn't have to see them up front, but had the opportunity to look into them and figure out, okay, is there a reason that I could resolve to make this work for me? However, those 0 value quotes, when being sorted, would appear at the top of your insurance quote list, which would then look like you've been declined a bunch of times, and then you get your lowest quote. So we need to kind of get the lowest quote at the top, the highest quote at the bottom, but underneath that have all the 0 value decline reasons. So it's kind of like it's not very complicated as a sort, but it's not just a standard sort of premium, which is what we're going to dig into shortly. After the data section, we have this section called computed, which I'm just going to jump over, which handles all that filtering that I just talked about. And we're going to look at this method here called fetch quotes. It's very similar to what we had over in the jQuery world. And in fact, we're actually still using jQuery's AJAX method here. It's not necessarily the best way to do AJAX calls. You could use libraries like Axios, but if you are coming from the jQuery world, the point is to show you can still use jQuery and the tools that you know with Vue.js. Like you can, it's going to ease that transition across for you as you go through the learning process. The difference here is when you get your response back, instead of actually building up a HTML structure that we're going to add into the DOM, we're actually just taking the whole result set, which is an array of objects, and assigning them back up to this data property that we declared up here. We're then grabbing out the customer ID and setting a loading flag from true, which we started up here, to false. And we've got this simulated delay of 3.5 seconds. So if we now jump through the HTML code, we can see that it looks kind of similar to begin with. However, we have these like v- things everywhere. And these v- things are called directives in Vue.js, and they allow us to manipulate allow us to manipulate the data. Allow us to use the data to manipulate. Let me back up a sec. They allow us to manipulate the Vue.js's data to control what happens within the DOM. So in this particular scenario, here we have a view on click directive, which says when we click this button, call fetch quotes. And in fact, you can actually evaluate any JavaScript expression within these two quotes here. Further down, we have a v-if statement, which basically says if loading is true, then render everything inside this div here. We have else if. So these are all standard control structures which you'll be used to using within any sort of programming language, just sort of interpreted into DOM attributes. So in this particular scenario, we have customer ID is greater than 0. And this displays everything. One thing that was happening in the jQuery example is you kind of got this random table header just sitting there for no reason until you actually load any data in. This sort of solves that quite easily for you. And we have these mustache tags, which I guess are a new thing for anyone coming from the jQuery world. They're just they just print values out from your Vue.js data object. And we have another directive here called model, and this actually allows us to use Vue.js's two-way data binding. So when we change the value of this input here, it will be reflected in the data within Vue.js's data, and if we changed it within the data of Vue.js, it will be reflected within the DOM as well. Finally, we can get over to the table, and it looks very similar to begin with. It still has the same header and everything like that. However, when we get down to the table body, we can see that the markup is where markup belongs, which is within the HTML of your, markup belongs in markup in my head. We can see a new directive called v4, which is just a way to iterate over a data set. We're using something called quotes to show, which is what we're going to come on to shortly. But if we just imagine them as the list of quotes, so we can say for all of the quotes, take each one and loop through them and print them out in this particular way. And that is rendering our HTML. So our HTML is staying where HTML belongs. And actually, our JavaScript code is not that big at all. If I was to take this piece out, which I'm going to come on to shortly, and hope that I can undo this change, our JavaScript code is really simple. Like, we are clearly just going to an endpoint, pulling some data back, assigning them to data properties, and then letting the DOM manipulate the DOM. Letting the framework manipulate the DOM for us so we don't have to worry about it. And if we decided to change the DOM or change any element IDs or anything like that, it wouldn't really matter because our directives are handling the rendering for us. I'm just going to undo this and come back to this piece here. This is one of my favorite things with Vue.js, which is something called computed properties. And they allow us, computed properties watch data elements within our Vue.js instance and react to changes in that data. So here we're just using JavaScript's filter and sort methods to allow us to solve the problem of having 0 value premiums at the top of our results table, and allow us to use that show all toggles checkbox so that we can basically switch between the two states. So let me bring up the final version of this. Hold up. now, and we can see actually in not much code, we have managed to achieve everything that we were supposed to achieve. Sorry about this, hold up. So we can't see the table because we have that view rest. This was supposed to be if we had a live demo, right? So we can see right now, instead of having 10 results, because it's going to exactly the same endpoint, we can actually see we're getting 4 out of 10 results. Our premiums are in ascending order. And if we were to toggle show all, then we can see all of our failed or declined quotes at the bottom of our table. This was actually this is a real example that's, obviously it's cut down and stuff, but this was a real example, and it's still actually in production at our place right now. It's still script tags, and it still works like that for this particular product. So that was really my journey from jQuery over to Vue.js, and the real example that got me there. The code itself is over on my GitHub page, which I gave you guys earlier, which is, if you've forgotten, it's Talv Bansal, so github.com/Talv Bansal. And I think that basically wraps everything I have to say up for now. Have you guys got any questions, or are we okay? How long did it take me to do the Vue.js example? So I hated jQuery the entire time that I learned it, so it actually took me longer to do the jQuery example than it did the Vue example. But the point being, now that I've managed to get into and become invested in Vue.js, doing things with jQuery where I'm manipulating the DOM is really slow and it's not an enjoyable experience. But there's a lot. So okay, let me tell you quickly about what made me want to do this talk. I'm new to New York. In case you haven't figured this out, I'm not from around here. And I've been going to a lot of meetups to meet a lot of people, and it really shocked me how many people still only know, they don't even know vanilla JavaScript, they just know jQuery. Like, that's their go-to thing, and if it's not jQuery, it's not happening for them. So I was like, there really needs to be a way for people to move from that world into the modern JavaScript world, and that's where hopefully my example, my real-world experience will hopefully help encourage people to move across. Oh, so the question was, can I talk about the differences between computed properties and methods? The primary difference is computed properties are watching data attributes constantly. So as data attributes update, so do your computed properties, whereas methods have to be called explicitly. The performance advantage that I've noticed, so I have never done any benchmarking myself, I've got to be completely transparent with you, but at least in my reading, manually manipulating and re-rendering the DOM is an expensive thing to do, and my understanding is that there are better programmers out there than I who will manipulate and manage the DOM in a more efficient way, so let them do what they're better at. Right, correct.